We are seeing shares of Moderna get a pop in the session, up more than 4% after the company announced it's expanding its production lines to make room for manufacturing its booster shots. The additions will help expand its overall production capacity by 50%. All of this comes even as COVID-19 case counts continue to decline nationally. It is down nearly 20% over the last few weeks. Let's bring in Dr. Rishi Desai, Osmosis Chief Medical Officer and former CDC officer. Doctor, it's great to talk to you today. The Moderna news, certainly an interesting one at a time when I think a lot of Americans are sort of trying to think ahead. Yes, things look good right now, but what are the potentials for additional booster shots come fall? What are the potentials for infection rates to go up because of the Delta variant? How are you looking at all of the variables right now?
So I know it might seem counterintuitive that you're seeing more vaccine production in the face of fewer cases. In the U.S., we're very fortunate right now, going through a good period. I think that the situation is that, as you pointed out, there are going to be variants that come along. Right now there's the Delta variant. Tomorrow there's going to be, another variant. And so we're going to have to keep kind of staying a step or two ahead of the coronavirus. And we know that the best way to do that is to immunize against these other variants. And the current vaccine doesn't do a great job against these other variants. I would say it does a good job, not a great job. And so that means that you have to continue coming out with booster doses, which will help you boost that vaccine effectiveness. So that's really the key there, is you get that booster dose out there. And keep in mind, the world needs more vaccine. Over half the world hasn't seen vaccine yet. So there's a huge demand to vaccinate the world. That's one issue. And two, to protect folks specifically against these variants. And that's why more vaccine is needed.
And Dr. Desai, when we look into some of the countries that maybe haven't vaccinated as high a percentage of their populations as we have here, or the UK has, they're probably watching the Delta variant and very concerned about what could happen if that starts to spread in their countries. I mean, even when you look at the EU right now, there are countries that lag the UK. Talk to me about maybe some of the concerns that you have there for those countries that are playing from behind here.
Yeah, look, this gets very personal for me. I have family in India, family members that have specifically died of COVID already. And it's very concerning because those folks, they didn't have access to vaccine because it wasn't available in their town or their community. Countries around the world that are behind, the America and the UKs of the world, they're basically trying to protect their population as best they can. And so I think their best shot at it, is to get vaccinations out there and available as quick as possible. And if and when that booster dose becomes available, to start, including that in the messaging right up front as well. So I think the faster we can get that vaccine out there, the better. Keep in mind also, when someone, let's say in another country, gets ill, yes, it sucks. Yes, it's terrible. And yes, it's scary. But that person also becomes a risk for creating a variant that can come back to the US, to the UK, and other countries and cause outbreaks. So there's a couple of reasons why you want to make sure vaccine goes abroad. A, because it's the right thing to do. But B, because that creates a risk for variants to come back and cause havoc here at home.
On what's playing out over in India, I mean, you pointed to your family there too. How much progress has been made in terms of vaccinations? We remember seeing those images a few months ago when they were at their peak with the COVID infections. But how much have vaccinations been distributed, and what are some of the hurdles, as you see, in terms of getting to what ultimately is the goal of herd immunity?
Yeah, I mean, take a very populous country like India, where you've got a huge wealth inequities. Some populations maybe in wealthier parts of Bombay, things are probably a lot better in terms of vaccine protection. In most of India, that's just not the case. And so still a fraction of the population has been immunized, on the order of around 10% or so. And even with these huge numbers of vaccines being shipped to India, Nepal, Bangladesh, all these countries, it still doesn't meet the need, not even close. And so even though cases have come down and deaths have come down, which is fantastic, and a lot of that is because of public health measures, not because of vaccines that have kind of made their inroads there. So it's really public health measures, social distancing, putting mandates about who can be out and when. That has really made the difference for countries like that at this point.
Yeah, and it's a natural jumping off point to really ask about the upcoming Olympic Games, because you think about the context of what we're watching here and the lifting of some of those guidelines to have fans granted limited capacity in a lot of these games, but fans now from Japan allowed to go, international fans not. But I mean, when you look at those risks in Japan around the games, how worried would you be about if really it was those measures that got us back to normal, maybe in combination with vaccines, but kind of the undoing of that? It seems like even people there in Japan are a little bit worried.
Yeah, I mean, the public health leadership in Japan has made it very clear they don't support that. They don't want 10,000 local supporters going to these events, which is what has been allowed. And if you look at the guidelines, they say things like the local supporters are not going to be allowed to cheer. They're not going to be allowed to kind of linger. They have to go home right away. Now, practically speaking, if you're in charge of that, how are you going to get 10,000 people to not cheer? How are you going to get 10,000 people to go home right away? That's just not going to happen. And so I think even with those kind of things on paper, practically speaking, that's a very hard thing to accomplish. And if we look back on the Olympics and say, oh my gosh, Japan was doing quite well, but now look at this surge that they're seeing. How are we going to feel about the fact that we had these these policies go through? I think people are going to look back and say that this was a mistake. So I would say at this point in time, having 10,000 people in a crowd is probably not the wisest thing to do. And it's probably not the safest thing for the athletes either, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's going to be hard to get 10,000 people to not cheer at all. Kind of goes against the spirit of the Olympics, but we'll be watching to see how successful it is. Dr. Rishi Desai, Osmosis Chief Medical Officer, as well as former CDC officer. Thanks so much for joining us today.